Hi, on this topic, we are going to discuss the book of accounts that is used in accounting. So the learning objectives on this topic is to identify the books of accounts and its uses. Ano ba yung mga gamit nitong mga books of accounts na ginagamit sa accounting? The second learning objective is to illustrate the format of the general and special journals and to illustrate the format of general and subsidiary ledgers. So, sa accounting, meron tayong mga book of accounts na ginagamit. First is journals, and second is ledgers. So, ano ba yung journals? Ano ba yung ledgers? Saan ba ginagamit ang journals? And saan ba ginagamit ang ledgers? The two books of accounts that we usually use in accounting is we called journals and ledgers. So, in journals, meron tayong dalawang types, and that is called general journals and special journals. In ledger, meron din tayong dalawang types ng ledgers, and yan ay general ledgers and subsidiary ledgers. So in this topic, we were going to distinguish what is general journals versus special journals and what is general ledgers and subsidiary ledgers. So the first book of accounts is called journals. So these journals is the chronological record of the entity's transaction. It is an accounting record wherein business transactions are first recorded through the use of journal entries. So ano nga ba yung journal entries? So journal entries shows all the effects of a business transactions in terms of debits and credits through the process which we call journalizing. So that is why we call journals as the book of original entry, kasi instead of recording these business transactions directly in the ledger, we initially record it first in the journals. So there are two types of journals. First is the special journals. So what is the use of special journals? The special journals is used to record transactions of a similar nature. We often use these special journals for us to record those transactions that have similar nature. Like for example, all transactions that involves cash, transactions that involves payment of cash, and others. And through the use of these special journals, we can able to simplify the recording process. Napapadali natin yung pag-record ng paulit-ulit na transactions. Thus, we can able to have an efficient way of recording and retrieving financial informations. Okay, so in special journals, ito yung ilang sa mga examples na usually ginagamit sa accounting. First is sales journal, second is purchases journal, third is cash receipt journals, and fourth is the cash disbursement journals. So the difference between these journals is its uses. So in sales journal, we use these specific journals to record sales on account. So lahat ng transactions na on account, transactions regarding sales on account, we record it with the use of the sales journal. In purchases journals, ginagamit naman natin ito to record those purchases of inventory that is on account. So, ibig sabihin, lahat ng mga purchases na ating binibili, na inventory, na utang is nilalagay natin or nire-record natin through the use of the purchases journal. So, third is the cash receipts journal. So, saan naman ginagamit itong cash receipts journal? So, yung cash receipts journals is used to record all transactions involving receipts of cash. So, lahat ng transactions that involve receipts of cash, sa cash receipts journals naman natin ini-entry. And the last is the cash disbursement journal. So, cash disbursement journal is used naman to record the transactions involving payments of cash. So, lahat ng transactions that involves payments of cash, ini-entry natin sa cash disbursement journals. So, Gaya ng sabi ko kanina, the difference between these examples of special journals is its uses. So those transactions that cannot be recorded on the special journals that I have mentioned a while ago are recorded in the general journals. So ano ba yung mga typical entries that we usually record in the general journals? So first is the adjusting entries. So all those adjusting entries that we identify at the end of the period, we put it or record it through the use of the general journals. Second is correcting entries. So pag meron tayong mga nakitang errors na kailangang i-correct, so gumagawa tayo ng mga correcting entries. And in-entry natin yon or nire-record natin yung mga correcting entries na yan through the use of the general journals. Third is the reversing entries. So yung reversing entries naman, typically we do it at the beginning of the next period. And these reversing entries are also recorded in the general journal. And last is the purchase of inventory and exchange for notes payables. So typically, those transactions that cannot be recorded in the mentioned special journals, we usually record that transactions in the general journals. So the second book of accounts that we use in accounting is called ledger. And ledger do have two types. This is called general ledger and the one is called special ledgers. So ledgers is referred to as the groupings of the entity's accounts. So the major use of this book of accounts is to classify and summarize the effects of business on the accounts and to prepare data for the preparations of financial statement. So ledgers is called as the reference book, book of final entries, or secondary entries because it is only used after the business transactions are first recorded in the journals. And yung tawag sa process ng recording in the ledger is called posting. So in the general ledger, there are two general groups of accounts, and this is called as the balance sheet or permanent accounts. So ano yung mga typical na permanent accounts? So these are the asset accounts, liabilities accounts, and owner's equity accounts. And meron din tayong tinatawag na temporary accounts or income statement accounts. So these are the income accounts and expenses account. Kapag sinabi natin temporary or nominal accounts, it is only used to gather informations for a particular accounting period. So at the end of the period, the balances of these accounts are transferred to a permanent owner's equity account. So in the general ledgers, each account has its own record in the general ledgers. So every account in the ledger maintains the basic format of the T accounts. So the difference only between the T accounts and the general ledger is that general ledger offers more informations. Like in general ledgers, the account has its specific account number at the upper right corner and a journal reference columns as compared to journal or T accounts na wala tayong makikita ng account numbers and journal reference column. So the two major kinds of ledgers are called general ledgers and subsidiary ledgers. So general ledgers contains all the accounts appearing in the trial balances, while the subsidiary ledgers are the ledgers that provides a breakdown of the balances of controlling accounts. So pag sinabi natin controlling accounts or control accounts, it is one accounts in which consists of a group of accounts with similar nature, like for example, accounts payable or accounts receivable. So the balance of the controlling accounts, like for example, account receivable or accounts payable, is shown in the general ledger, while the balances of the accounts that comprise the controlling accounts are shown in the subsidiary ledger. So those transactions or the balances of these controlling accounts is actually in details in the subsidiary ledgers. But take note that not all accounts in the general ledger are called as or considered as controlling accounts. So only those whose balances necessarily need a breakdown are considered as controlling accounts. Like for example nga, gaya ng nabanggit ko kanina, accounts receivable and accounts payable are the typical controlling accounts that we usually break down the details. Like what I have mentioned a while ago, the two general group of accounts that we usually see in the general ledgers are the permanent accounts and temporary accounts. So the difference between these two groups of accounts is that permanent accounts are usually the asset, liabilities, and owner's equity accounts. So the balances of these balance sheet accounts or asset accounts, liabilities account, and owner's equity accounts are typically forwarded in the next period. While in temporary accounts, these are the income statement accounts or the income accounts and expenses accounts. So usually these accounts are used to gather informations for a particular accounting period only. And at the end of the period, the balances of these accounts are transferred or typically transferred to a permanent owner's equity account. And at the end of the period, these temporary accounts are closed. And whatever is the balances that we gather in the temporary accounts, we close it in a permanent owner's equity account. To summarize the two major book of accounts, so it is journals and ledgers. So these two books of accounts also have two types. In journals, we have general journals and special journals, and in ledgers, we have what we call general ledger and subsidiary ledgers. So journals is called as the book of original entries, while ledger is called as the book of secondary entries. So the functions of journals is the journalizing. So we use journals whenever we journalize transactions. So it is used for the initial recording of business transactions, while ledger is used during the posting period. And we use ledgers in classifying business transactions. So these are the typical format of the general journal. As you can see, there's a date column, account titles column, account numbers or posting reference column. There's also a debit column and credit column. And there's 8 portions where you can put the centavos. So on dates, so the year and months are not rewritten for every entry unless the year or months changes or a new page is needed. So in general journal, while recording a transactions, the year and months are actually not rewritten for every entry of business transactions unless na nagkaroon ng changes in year, so natapos na yung isang buong taon ng transactions, or kapag nagkaroon ng changes in months. So, pwedeng natapos na yung isang buong month ng transactions. O kaya naman, gumamit na kayo ng panibagong page. So, kapag gumamit kayo ng panibagong page or nagkaroon ng changes in months and year, saka lang nire-rewrite ang year and month on the general journals. So, on the portions of the account titles and explanations, so in these sections, the accounts to be debited is entered at the extreme left of the first line. So, yung pinaka left side or extreme left side nung account titles and explanation column, doon natin nilalagay yung accounts that should be debited. And then, the accounts to be credited is entered slightly indented. So, the accounts to be credited is slightly indented on the next lines. And then, after the credit accounts, so a brief descriptions of the transaction is usually made on the line below the credit. So, yung brief description is nilalagay natin for each accounting entry for us to have the idea kung ano ba yung business transactions na nangyari. And after each journal entries, nag-i-skip tayo ng isang line. So, on the PR column or posting reference column, ginagamit natin siya when the entries are already posted. So, as long as the entries are not yet posted in the general ledgers, hindi natin nilalagyan ng posting reference yung PR column. Next is the debit column. So, the debit amount for each transactions that we record are recorded in this column. While the credit side, iyon naman yung ginagamit natin in order for us to record the credit amount for each account that is entered in this column. So, this is the typical format of the general journal. So what about the general ledgers? So here are the typical format of the general ledgers. As you can see, there's a date column, explanation column, JR or journal reference column, debit column, credit column, and balance column. In the general ledger, we transfer the date of transactions from the journal to the ledger. So whatever is the date of a specific transactions that we journalize in the journal, we transfer it to the ledger. And kung ano man yung date na nakalagay doon, yung pag-record natin ng entries sa general journal or special journal, yun din yung ilalagay nating date on the general ledger kapag pinost na natin yung transactions. So we also transfer the page number from the journal to the journal reference column of the ledgers. Once that we already posted a specific transactions or entry in the general ledger, we transfer the journal reference in the journal reference sections of the ledger. So kapag na-post na natin yung specific transactions or journal entries from the journals to ledgers, saka lang natin nilalagay yung journal reference sa journal or JR column in the general ledger. Next is kung ano yung figures that we record in the journals as a debit figure, yun yung nilalagay natin or tinatransfer natin or pinopost natin on the debit column of the general ledger. Same with the credit column, kung ano yung credit figure ng specific accounting entries that we record in the journals, yun rin yung tinatransfer or pinopost natin on the credit column. So also, as you can see, in the general ledger, on the upper side of the figure, you can see the account name as well as the account number. So once the specific transactions or journal entries are already posted on the general ledger, so nilalagayan na natin yung posting reference ng general journal and nilalagay na natin dun yung posting reference kung saan natin pinost sa general ledger yung specific entry. So what about the subsidiary ledgers? So this is the general format of the subsidiary ledgers. It is actually same as the general ledger format. However, it is illustrated in details. So whatever is the account balance of the controlling account that is posted in the general ledgers, it is breakdown in details with the use of subsidiary ledgers. As you can see in the figures on the left side, there's a date column in the subsidiary ledgers. There's also an explanation column, reference column, debit column, credit column, and balance column. So this is the general format of the subsidiary ledgers. So these are the book of accounts that we use in recording business transactions. And I hope that on this topic, you are familiarized with the general format of this book of accounts as well as identify the uses of this specific book of accounts.